The cold weight of the ring sliding onto her finger felt like a trap snapping shut, which was precisely what it was. Evangeline Ashcombe had approximately 3 seconds to decide whether being claimed by the most dangerous man in London was better than being destroyed by everyone else in the room, and Duke Alistair Ravenscar wasn't waiting for her answer. His hand was still wrapped around hers, thumb pressed against her racing pulse, and the ballroom had gone so silent she could hear the hiss of gas lamps overhead. 300 witnesses, 300 people watching her ruin transform into something else entirely, something that might be worse. "Smile," Ravenscar said, his voice pitched low enough that only she heard it. Not a request, a command. Evangeline's mouth curved without her permission. Some survival instinct, understanding that hesitation now would finish what Marquis Montclair had started. The rival aristocrat stood 6 feet away, his accusations still hanging in the air like smoke. Unstable, hysterical, dangerous to decent society. Ravenscar turned to face the crowd, and Evangeline felt the shift in the room like a physical thing. Men who'd been leaning forward to savor her destruction suddenly remembered urgent conversations elsewhere. Women who'd been whispering behind fans went still. "Gentlemen," Ravenscar said, and somehow his normal speaking voice carried farther than Montclair's theatrical pronouncement had. "Ladies, I trust this clarifies Miss Ashcombe's position. Not my fiancé, not my intended." Just position, like she was a chess piece he'd moved to block a checkmate. Evangeline's employer, the Dowager Countess of Ashford, for whom she'd worked as paid companion and private secretary for 18 months, stood frozen near the refreshment table, her face a study in calculations. The Countess had built her power on hosting the most exclusive events of the season, on knowing everyone's secrets, and holding just enough back to keep them desperate for her favor. She did not appreciate surprises, and this was a very large surprise. "Your Grace," Montclair said, recovering with the kind of smooth charm that had made him a favorite in certain circles. "Surely you cannot mean to—" "I never say things I don't mean." Ravenscar's tone could have frozen champagne. "Do you?" The question landed like a blade between ribs. Montclair's smile held, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something that made Evangeline's instincts scream danger. She'd seen that look before. 20 minutes ago, in fact, when she'd been standing in the shadows near the library door. 20 minutes earlier, Evangeline had been doing what she did best, being invisible while paying attention. The Dowager Countess's spring ball was the event of the season, which meant Evangeline had spent the past week cross-referencing guest lists, with seating charts, donation records with travel schedules, and hostess notes with actual behavior patterns. It was the kind of detail work the Countess claimed to despise, but absolutely required, the scaffolding that made her social empire function. Evangeline had discovered the discrepancy in the charity ledger that morning. The Ravenscroft Children's Fund, a pet project of Montclair's, had pledged a substantial sum for rural education initiatives. Noble, generous, completely fraudulent as far as she could tell, because the addresses listed for 3 of the proposed schoolhouses didn't exist. She'd checked property records, parish registries, and ordnance survey maps. The routes were real, the destinations were invented, but the carriage schedule was very, very specific. She'd been standing in the shadows near the library, trying to decide whether to mention it to the Countess, when she'd heard Montclair's voice drifting through the half-open door. "Confirmed for the 15th. The route passes directly through Ravenscar Land at dawn." Another man's voice, unfamiliar. "And the diversion?" "Already arranged. The girl will provide the perfect distraction. Once she's removed, no one will question the increased patrols." Evangeline's heart had kicked hard against her ribs. The girl could have meant anyone, but the way Montclair said removed, like discussing a stain on upholstery, made her skin crawl. "You're certain she'll break?" the unfamiliar voice asked. "She's a paid companion with a family estate in foreclosure and a brother in her care. One public accusation of instability, and she'll be committed before week's end. Ashford won't risk the association." The world had tilted sideways. She's a paid companion. They were talking about her. Now, standing in the center of the ballroom, with Ravenscar's ring burning against her finger, Evangeline understood 3 things with perfect clarity. First, Montclair had just tried to execute the plan she'd overheard. The public accusation. The threat of institutionalization. The humiliation designed to make her employer cut ties and make Evangeline herself too desperate, too broken to cause problems. Second, whatever those men were planning to do on Ravenscar land, they needed her gone to do it. Third, Duke Alistair Ravenscar had just made her the most protected woman in London, and possibly the most trapped. The crowd was beginning to recover, murmurs building like a tide. Evangeline felt Ravenscar's hand shift to the small of her back, a possessive touch that sent heat racing down her spine, even as her mind catalogued the strategic implications. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Not to her, to his beta, a dark-haired man who'd materialized at his shoulder like a shadow gaining substance. The beta's eyes were cold and assessing as they swept over Evangeline. "Your Grace." "Perhaps." "Now, Calder." The name clicked into place. Bram Calder, Ravenscar's right hand, the man rumored to handle the Duke's delicate business. The kind of man who made problems disappear in ways that never touched his master's reputation. Evangeline was abruptly, viscerally aware that she'd just traded one trap for another. Ravenscar guided her through the crowd, with the kind of effortless command that parted bodies without him having to speak. People stepped aside, conversations died. The Dowager Countess watched them go with an expression Evangeline couldn't quite read. Fury, perhaps, or calculation, or both. The night air hit her face like a slap when they stepped into the garden. Gas lamps flickered along the paths, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the Thames and the endless rumble of the city beyond the estate walls. A carriage waited, black lacquer gleaming in the lamplight. Ravenscar handed her up with impersonal efficiency, then followed, settling across from her with the kind of controlled grace that made her think of predators pretending to be civilized. Calder took the seat beside his duke, still watching Evangeline like she might be concealing a weapon. The door shut. The carriage lurched into motion, and Ravenscar leaned forward, his eyes catching the light in a way that made something primal in Evangeline's hindbrain whisper run. "Now," he said, voice soft and absolutely unyielding. "You're going to tell me exactly what you heard in that library." Evangeline's throat went dry. The ring felt like it weighed 10 pounds. She could lie. She could play ignorant. She could dissolve into hysterics the way Montclair had accused her of being prone to. Or she could do what she'd been trained for: assess, adapt, and find the angle that kept her useful instead of disposable. "You knew," she said. Not a question. "You knew Montclair was going to move against me tonight." Ravenscar's expression didn't change, but something in the quality of his attention sharpened. "Answer the question, Miss Ashcombe." "I overheard a conversation between Montclair and another man. I didn't see the second man's face. They were discussing a route through your land scheduled for the 15th. Carriages, patrols, and removing me as a distraction before they proceeded." Calder swore under his breath. Ravenscar's eyes narrowed fractionally. "What else?" The Duke's voice was still calm. But Evangeline could feel the danger underneath it, like a current in deep water. "The route corresponds with discrepancies in Montclair's charity fund ledger. 3 addresses that don't exist. Carriage schedules that make no sense unless the cargo isn't actually educational materials." She paused. "And they seemed confident that once I was institutionalized, no one would question increased patrols or changed routes." "Christ," Calder muttered. "She's perceptive," Ravenscar finished, still watching Evangeline with that unnerving focus. "And now a liability to men who don't leave loose ends." The words settled in her stomach like ice. "I'm aware." "Are you?" Ravenscar leaned back, the motion somehow making him seem larger rather than smaller in the confined space. "Montclair doesn't make idle threats, Miss Ashcombe. If he decided you were unstable, he has the social weight and the institutional connections to make it reality. Ashford wouldn't have protected you. Your family can't afford the legal fight. You would have been committed, medicated, and conveniently silent within a fortnight." Evangeline's hands clenched in her lap. She forced them to relax. "Yes, I'm aware of that too. And yet you were simply going to—" "What? Hope it didn't happen." "I was going to find proof," she said, hearing the edge in her own voice. documentation linking the fraudulent addresses to whoever's actually funding this operation. Then leverage it. Calder made a sound that might have been grudging respect or disbelief. Ravenscar tilted his head slightly. With what leverage? You're a paid companion with no connections, no money, and no legal standing to challenge a Marcus. With information, Evangeline said. The one thing that's always valuable, Your Grace, is knowing what other people are desperate to hide. For a long moment, Ravenscar simply looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something sharper. Calder, he said, not looking away from Evangeline. What do you think? I think she's either brilliant or suicidal, the beta said flatly. Possibly both. I think, Ravenscar said slowly, that Miss Ashcombe just became significantly more useful, alive, and cooperative than she would be institutionalized or dead. Evangeline's pulse kicked up. Meaning we're going to make a deal. Ravenscar's voice was calm, businesslike, as if they were discussing a trade agreement instead of her entire future. You have a problem, I have a problem. We're going to solve them together. What's your problem? Evangeline asked, though she suspected she already knew. Someone is using human society, charity funds, legal routes, institutional cover, to move through my territory in ways that shouldn't be possible. They're planning something for the 15th that requires secrecy and force. His eyes were very dark in the dim carriage. I need to know who, what, and how to stop it without starting a war I'm not ready to fight. And my problem? Your employer will dismiss you by morning. Montclair will ensure your family estate is seized and your brother removed from your care. Within a week, you'll be facing commitment proceedings. He paused. Unless you're under my protection. The ring on her finger felt like it was burning. What kind of protection? Evangeline asked carefully. The permanent kind. Ravenscar's gaze didn't waver. You work for me. You help me trace these routes, identify the players, and find the evidence I need to shut this down. In return, I guarantee your position, your family's safety, and your freedom from institutional threats. No one touches you without going through me. For how long? Until the threat is neutralized. He leaned forward slightly. Or until you prove untrustworthy, in which case the protection ends and you deal with Montclair on your own. Evangeline's mind raced. It was a trap, obviously, but it was a trap with air holes, which was more than she'd had 5 minutes ago. I want terms, she said. Calder made a noise of protest. Ravenscar held up one hand, silencing him. Go on. Protection extends to my brother and the estate staff, not just me. Agreed. Written legal intervention regarding the foreclosure proceedings. I want documentation that you're using your influence to block the seizure. Ravenscar's expression didn't change. That will cost me a favor I was saving for something else. Then save something else. Calder looked like he wanted to object. Ravenscar's mouth curved very slightly. Agreed. What else? Evangeline took a breath. This was the dangerous part. A boundary clause. Whatever that ring means to the people in your world, in private, I'm not your property. You don't dictate where I go, who I speak to, or what I do with my own mind. The temperature in the carriage seemed to drop. That ring, Ravenscar said softly, is the only reason Montclair can't touch you. It's pack law and human law combined. Taking it off has consequences. I'm not asking to take it off. I'm asking for basic autonomy within the arrangement. Calder was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Ravenscar's eyes had gone very still. You're negotiating, he said, and Evangeline couldn't tell if he was impressed or insulted. You said I was perceptive, she replied. I'm being perceptive enough to understand that if I don't set boundaries now, I won't have any later. For a long, tense moment, Ravenscar said nothing. Then he inclined his head fractionally. Agreed. Within reason, you keep your autonomy. But when I give you an order that concerns your safety or this investigation, you follow it. Immediately, without argument. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even half of what she wanted. But it was more than she dared hope for. Agreed, Evangeline said. Then we have a deal, Miss Ashcombe. Ravenscar extended his hand. She looked at it for a moment, strong, scarred along the knuckles, steady as stone, then reached out and shook it. His grip was warm and absolutely controlled. And the moment their skin touched, something shifted in the air between them. A tightness in her chest she hadn't noticed eased fractionally, replaced by a different kind of tension entirely. Ravenscar's eyes flickered with something she couldn't name. He released her hand and sat back. Calder will escort you to a safe house tonight. Tomorrow we move you to Ravenscar Hall. You'll have access to my records, my library, and my staff. You'll also have a guard. I don't need— You do! His voice cut through her protest like a blade. Montclair will move against you the moment he realizes what happened tonight. Until we know the full scope of this operation, you don't leave protected grounds without escort. Evangeline wanted to argue, but the memory of Montclair's voice, "The girl will provide the perfect distraction," was too fresh. "Fine," she said. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Calder opened the door and stepped out, leaving Evangeline alone with Ravenscar for one final moment. "Miss Ashcombe," the Duke said quietly, "one more thing." She looked at him, this man who'd just claimed her in front of 300 witnesses, whose ring sat heavy on her finger, whose world she'd just agreed to enter. "Whatever you think you know about what I am," Ravenscar said, "you don't. When you learn the truth, remember that you chose this. Remember that I gave you a choice." Before she could respond, Calder was there, offering his hand to help her down. Evangeline stepped out into the London night, her heart pounding, her future rewritten, and a threat she couldn't yet name settling over her shoulders like a cloak. As she turned from the carriage, a strange, resonant warmth pulsed once from the ring, startlingly different from its earlier cold weight. Behind her, Ravenscar's carriage pulled away into the fog. Ahead, Calder was already moving toward a nondescript building with barred windows and a door that looked like it could withstand a siege. And in her pocket, folded small and hidden, was the charity ledger page she'd stolen from the Countess's study, the one with Montclair's signature and 3 addresses that didn't exist. Whatever game she'd just entered, at least she'd brought ammunition. The safe house was not what Evangeline had expected. She'd imagined something austere and prison-like, all locked doors and barred windows. Instead, Calder led her into a narrow townhouse in Bloomsbury that looked utterly ordinary from the street, right down to the window boxes and the brass door knocker, but felt like a fortress the moment she stepped inside. Heavy curtains, reinforced locks, and a maid waiting in the entrance hall who looked like she could break a man's arm without spilling the tea tray. "Miss Ashcombe," the woman said, her accent pure East London beneath a layer of training. "I'm Maisie Hartwell. His Grace sent word you'd be needing assistance." Evangeline blinked. You need sleep, a decent meal, and clothes that aren't ballroom silk," Maisie said briskly. "Calder, you can go. I've got her." The beta looked like he wanted to argue, then apparently thought better of it. He gave Evangeline one last assessing look. "Dawn, be ready." The door closed behind him with a solid thunk. Maisie gestured toward the stairs. "Come on then. You look half dead. And His Grace doesn't tolerate mistakes from exhaustion." "I'm not working for him yet," Evangeline said, following anyway because her feet hurt and her mind was spinning and she needed somewhere to sit down before she fell down. "You're wearing his ring," Maisie said. "That means you're working for him. Or you're dead. There's not much middle ground with the Duke." The casual mention of death should have been alarming. Somehow, after the night she'd had, it just felt honest. The room Maisie showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that overlooked a walled garden. Evangeline sank onto the mattress and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. She had a deal. She had protection. She had enemies who wanted her silenced. And she had a stolen ledger page that might be the only proof she'd ever get. "Miss?" Maisie's voice was quieter now. "Can I ask you something?" Evangeline looked up. "Go ahead. Are you here because you want to be, or because you didn't have a choice?" It was the kind of question that deserved honesty. "Both," Evangeline said. "Does it matter?" Maisie's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "To His Grace? No. He'll use you either way. But to me?" She shrugged. "I like to know if I'm helping someone who wants help or someone who's just surviving. Surviving, Evangeline said. For now. Good enough. Maisie moved toward the door. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse. Dawn came too early and too cold. Evangeline woke to Maisie laying out clothes. A practical walking dress in deep gray, sturdy boots. A cloak that looked like it could withstand a gale. No corset, she noticed. Just a simpler bodice and layers designed for movement. Where are we going? Evangeline asked. Ravenscar Hall, Maisie said. His Grace wants you on the estate where he can keep proper watch. The carriage ride took 3 hours, the city gradually giving way to open country and then to something wilder. Moors and forest pressing close to the road, fog clinging to the low places like it had weight. Evangeline watched the landscape change and tried not to think about how far she was from anything familiar. Ravenscar Hall rose out of the mist like something from a Gothic novel. All dark stone and sharp angles, windows that looked like watching eyes, surrounded by forests that seemed to go on forever. Calder met them at the entrance. His Grace is in the library. Follow me. The interior was just as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, dark wood, portraits of severe-looking ancestors who all seemed to have Ravenscar's bone structure, and that same predatory stillness. Evangeline's footsteps echoed on marble floors. The library door was open. Ravenscar stood at a massive desk covered in papers, maps, and what looked like property surveys. He didn't look up when she entered, just gestured to a chair across from him. Sit. We have work to do. No good morning, no how was your journey. Straight to business. Evangeline sat, spine straight, and waited. Ravenscar finally looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. He looked different here, she realized. Less like a duke performing civility and more like a commander planning a campaign. The control was still there, but it felt more like a weapon than a mask. The 15th is 4 days away, he said. I need to know what they're moving, how many people are involved, and where they plan to cross my land. I'll need access to the full charity fund records, Evangeline said. Not just what Montclair published publicly. The internal ledgers, correspondence, receipts. Ravenscar's eyebrow rose fractionally. And you think I have those? I think if anyone can acquire them, you can. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Calder, send word to our contact at the Charity Commission. I want everything related to the Ravenscroft Children's Fund on my desk by tonight. Calder nodded and left. Ravenscar leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're very confident for someone who was facing institutionalization 12 hours ago. Confidence implies I have options, Evangeline said. I don't. I have competence, and I'm choosing to use it. There's a difference. Is there? He tilted his head slightly, the gesture oddly inhuman. Most people in your position would still be hysterical. Most people in my position are already locked away, Evangeline replied. I prefer to be useful. Ravenscar's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he pushed a stack of papers across the desk. Property records for the eastern boundary of my land. Cross-reference them with the routes you found in Montclair's ledger. Find the gaps. It was a test, Evangeline realized. A way to see if she actually knew what she was doing, or if she'd been bluffing in the carriage. She pulled the papers toward her and started reading. 3 hours later, Evangeline had found something Ravenscar hadn't expected. The routes don't just pass through your land, she said, spreading 3 maps across the desk. They end here. Look, the charity fund shows deliveries continuing to these 3 villages. But the actual roads stop at your eastern boundary. There's nothing beyond this point except forest and moor. Ravenscar leaned forward, his attention razor-focused. Show me. She traced the lines with her finger. Here, here, and here. The carriages are documented as traveling another 10 miles past the road's end, but there's no infrastructure to support it. No villages, no schools, no reason for the route. Unless they're not actually carriages, Calder said from the doorway. Evangeline hadn't heard him return. If they're moving on foot after they reach the boundary, then they're not delivering supplies, Ravenscar finished. They're staging an incursion. The word incursion hung in the air like a threat. Evangeline looked between them. An incursion of what? Neither man answered immediately. Ravenscar's expression hardened, the first crack in his control she'd seen. Hunters, he said finally. Men who kill things that shouldn't exist, according to human law. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Evangeline's mind raced. Things that shouldn't exist. The way Ravenscar moved, the way Calder had appeared and disappeared like a shadow. The warning Ravenscar had given her last night. Whatever you think you know about what I am, you don't. What are you? She asked quietly. Ravenscar stood, the movement controlled but radiating tension. Someone who's about to have a much bigger problem than I anticipated. Calder, double the patrols on the eastern boundary. I want eyes on every access point. Your Grace. Now. Calder left without another word. Ravenscar turned back to Evangeline, and for the first time, she saw something close to uncertainty in his expression. Not fear, not quite, but a calculation that didn't balance the way he wanted it to. You've just made yourself significantly more valuable, he said, and significantly more dangerous to keep alive. Evangeline's throat tightened. Meaning? Meaning Montclair and whoever he's working with will escalate. They can't afford to have someone who can read their operation this clearly. He paused. You don't leave the estate without an armed escort. You don't go anywhere alone. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? It should have felt like an order. Instead, it felt like the first honest fear she'd heard from him. Understood, Evangeline said. Ravenscar crossed to the window, looking out over the fog-shrouded grounds. Calder will show you to your rooms. You'll have access to the library, but I need you to stay within the main house and walled gardens until we know more about their movements. For how long? Until the 15th. Or until they make their next move. He glanced back at her. Whichever comes first. The next move came sooner than either of them expected. Evangeline spent the rest of that day and the following morning combing through records in the library, cross-referencing routes with property ownership, and trying to identify who might be funding Harrowgate's operation. Maisie brought meals and kept her company with surprisingly sharp observations about estate management and suspicious strangers. By the second afternoon, Evangeline needed air. She'd been staring at ledgers until the numbers blurred, and the library walls felt like they were closing in. Just the gardens, she told Maisie. I'll stay within the walls. Maisie studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll come with you. His Grace would have my head if something happened. They walked through the formal gardens, staying close to the house where Evangeline could see guards posted at regular intervals. The afternoon was cold and gray, fog rolling in from the moors in thick banks that turned the world into a watercolor. Evangeline was examining a section of the garden wall, noting how it abutted the forest and wondering about patrol routes, when she saw them. Footprints in the soft earth near the base of the wall. Fresh, too large to be a gardener's. Pressed deep like someone had been standing there for a while, watching. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Maisie, she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the prints. How long have those been there? The maid went very still. They weren't there this morning. I walked this path at dawn, which meant someone had been on the estate grounds, inside the walls, within the last few hours. We need to tell His Grace, Maisie said, her hand going to something concealed in her skirts. A weapon, Evangeline realized. No. Evangeline's mind was racing. If someone's already breached the perimeter, telling Ravenscar will just alert them that we know. We need to... She stopped. There was a smell, faint but wrong, tobacco and gun oil, and something medicinal that made her think of hospitals. The same smell that had clung to Harrowgate's coat at the ball. He's here, Evangeline whispered. Harrowgate is already on the grounds. Maisie swore under her breath and pulled her toward the house. Move, now. But they'd barely taken 3 steps when a voice drifted through the fog. Miss Ashcombe, how convenient. I was hoping to speak with you. A man emerged from the mist, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that belonged in a gentleman's club. Behind him, 2 others in dark coats that didn't quite hide the weapons underneath. Sir Gideon Harrowgate, the second voice from the library, the man who'd planned her institutionalization like it was a minor scheduling problem. Evangeline's blood turned to ice. Maisie stepped slightly in front of her, hand still on whatever weapon she carried. You're trespassing, sir. His Grace doesn't take kindly to uninvited guests. Trespassing? Harrowgate's smile was thin and dangerous. I'm conducting a welfare check. Miss Ashcombe is clearly being held against her will. A paid companion playing Duchess in a madman's estate. The authorities would be very interested in her. Situation. The authorities answer to His Grace, Maisie said flatly. Some authorities, perhaps. Harrogate took a step closer. But the Charitable Commission has certain powers. Medical institutions have others. And when a young woman of previously sound mind suddenly exhibits erratic behavior, fleeing her employment, accepting a dubious claim from a man of, shall we say, questionable reputation, well, the commissioners have a duty to intervene. The word questionable was loaded with meaning Evangeline didn't quite understand, but Harrogate's tone made it clear. He knew what Ravenscar was. I'm not going anywhere with you, Evangeline said, forcing her voice steady. I think you are, Harrogate gestured to his men. There's a very comfortable private hospital in the city that specializes in cases of feminine hysteria. You'll be assessed, treated, and if you cooperate, released in perhaps 6 months. Long enough for this unfortunate situation to be properly resolved. 6 months. Long enough for the incursion to happen. Long enough for whatever Harrogate and Montclair were planning to succeed. Evangeline's mind raced. She could scream, but where were the guards? Had Harrogate done something to them? She could run, but his men were already moving to flank them, or she could use the one weapon she had. You made a mistake in the ledgers, Evangeline said, her voice steadier than she felt. The Charity Commission requires dual signatures for expenditures over £500. You only have one on the equipment purchases for the 15th. That makes the entire operation void under charitable law, which means it's fraudulent. Which means every penny can be traced back to whoever actually funded it. Harrogate's expression didn't change, but his men hesitated. Very clever, he said softly, and very foolish. Do you think exposing paperwork errors will save you? No, Evangeline said. But I think it will embarrass you badly enough that your allies will reconsider the partnership. Montclair won't appreciate being tied to a scandal that could reach Parliament. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Harrogate's smile widened, a terrible, patient expression. You're right, which is why you won't be alive to testify. He nodded to his men. They lunged. Maisie shoved Evangeline backward hard enough that she stumbled into the hedge. There was a flash of movement, the sound of impact. And then a snarl. Not human, not even close. Evangeline's blood turned to ice. The fog seemed to thicken, and then something moved through it, low to the ground, massive, fast as death. One of Harrogate's men went down with a scream. The other tried to run and didn't make it 3 steps. And then the creature stepped into view. Wolf, but not just a wolf. Too large, too aware, too deliberate in the way it placed itself between Evangeline and Harrogate. Its fur was dark as midnight, its eyes the exact color of no. Not possible. The wolf's gaze fixed on Harrogate with an intelligence that made Evangeline's skin crawl. When it growled, the sound resonated in her chest like a second heartbeat. Harrogate had gone pale. Just like your father, he whispered. The words venomous with a personal generations-old hatred. Abomination. The wolf's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could tear through bone. Run, Maisie hissed in Evangeline's ear. Miss, you have to. But Evangeline couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away from the creature that was somehow, impossibly, wearing the same expression of controlled fury she'd seen on Duke Alistair Ravenscar's face. Harrogate was backing away slowly, his hands raised. This isn't over. The council will hear about this. You've just signed your own death warrant, Ravenscar. The name hung in the air. The wolf didn't move, but its attention shifted fractionally, just enough to meet Evangeline's eyes. In that moment, she knew. Whatever you think you know about what I am, you don't. Oh God. Harrogate ran. His men dragged themselves after him, one limping badly, the other clutching his arm. The fog swallowed them whole. The wolf stood perfectly still, watching Evangeline with eyes that were far too human. She should run. She should scream. She should, Your Grace, she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. I think we need to talk. The air shimmered. Heat rolled off the creature in waves, and Evangeline looked away instinctively, some deep survival instinct understanding that witnessing the change itself might break something fundamental in her mind. There was a sound like thunder compressed into seconds, the smell of earth and wild things, and then the peculiar displacement of air that came with magic reshaping flesh and bone. Shifter magic, she would learn later, that reformed clothing along with the body, a practical necessity evolved over centuries. Evangeline, his voice, human, rough and raw, but definitely his. She turned back slowly. Ravenscar stood where the wolf had been, fully dressed, breathing hard, his hair disheveled and his eyes still carrying that inhuman gleam. Blood on his knuckles, dirt on his coat, real and impossible all at once. You weren't supposed to see that, he said. Evangeline's knees felt weak. She locked them. What are you? Exactly what you're thinking. His voice was steady, but she could hear the tension underneath. And now you have a choice to make. What choice? Her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own words. Run, Ravenscar said quietly. Scream. Tell the world what I am, and watch me burn. The ring won't stop you. I won't stop you. He meant it, Evangeline realized. He was giving her the option to destroy him. She looked at him, this man who was not entirely a man, who'd claimed her to save her life, who'd just fought off armed attackers with teeth and claws because they'd threatened her. This man who terrified her and fascinated her in equal measure. If I run, she said slowly, Harrogate wins. Montclair wins. The hunters cross your land and kill people like you, and my family loses everything. Yes, Ravenscar said. And if I stay? Then you're bound to a monster, he said flatly, and everything that comes with it. The word monster should have sent her running. Instead, Evangeline thought of the wolf's eyes, furious and protective in the same breath. She thought of Harrogate's smile when he'd mentioned the hospital. She thought of the ledger in her pocket and the routes that ended in forest, and the hunt that was coming whether she wanted it or not. She thought of her brother and the estate, and the life she'd had before tonight when she was invisible and powerless and small. I'm not running, she said. Ravenscar's eyes widened fractionally. Evangeline. I'm not running, she repeated, stronger now. But I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. What you are, what they are, what I've just walked into. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then he nodded slowly. Come with me, he said. He led her back through the gardens, past Maisie, who was efficiently dealing with blood on the gravel, and coordinating with guards who'd apparently been drugged by Harrogate's advance team. Through a side entrance Evangeline hadn't noticed before, down corridors that grew narrower and older until they reached a heavy door that looked like it belonged in a medieval keep. Ravenscar pushed it open. Inside was a room that was part library, part war room. Maps covered the walls, marked with symbols Evangeline didn't recognize, books in languages she couldn't read, and on the main table, a genealogy chart that made her head spin. We're called shifters, Ravenscar said, closing the door behind them. Werewolves, if you prefer the folklore term. We've existed alongside humans for centuries, hidden, scattered, organized into packs with territories and laws that predate your parliament. Evangeline sank into a chair, her mind reeling. I'm the Alpha King of this territory, he continued, which means I'm responsible for every shifter who lives on these lands, every human who crosses them, and every threat that tries to destroy the balance we've maintained. And Harrogate is part of a hunter organization that wants us exterminated. They use human institutions, charity funds, legal systems, hospitals as cover. They're very good at what they do. His voice was grim. And they're planning to use Montclair's routes to breach my territory with enough force to start a purge. The full scope of it crashed over her. This wasn't just about her family's estate or her own survival. This was about a hidden war she'd accidentally stumbled into. Why did you claim me? She asked. Really? Ravenscar's expression shifted into something complicated. Because you saw the pattern, because you asked the right questions, because he stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because the ring is more than just human protection, it's pack law. It binds you to me in ways that make you untouchable to rival alphas and visible to every shifter in 100 miles. Visible how? They can sense the bond. He met her eyes. They know you're mine. The possessive word sent heat through her that she absolutely did not want to examine. I'm not yours, she said. No, Ravenscar agreed quietly. You're not. But they don't know that. And as long as they believe it, you're protected. Evangeline's hand went to the ring on her finger. It was warm against her skin. Warmer than metal should be. What happens if I take it off? Pain, Ravenscar said bluntly. For both of us. The bond doesn't like separation once it's established, and every shifter in range will know the claim was rejected, which makes you vulnerable again. So I'm trapped. Yes. No apology. Just honesty. Evangeline should hate him for that, should rage against the cage he'd built around her. Instead, she found herself asking, "What do you need me to do?" Ravenscar stared at her. "You're not going to run. I believe we've established that." She stood, forcing her spine straight, despite her shaking hands. "You need to stop the incursion. I need my family safe and my freedom intact. We have 4 days until the 15th. Tell me the plan." For the first time since she'd met him, Duke Alistair Ravenscar looked genuinely surprised. Then slowly, he smiled. A real smile, not the controlled mask he wore for society. It transformed his face into something almost human. "The plan," he said, "starts with you being very brave and very reckless." "I'm a paid companion who just watched a duke turn into a wolf," Evangeline said. "I think we're past worrying about reckless." His smile widened. Then he crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him, close enough that her pulse jumped despite everything. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "Do you know that?" Evangeline's breath caught. This close, she could see the inhuman gleam still lingering in his eyes, could smell earth and wild things clinging to his skin. Every instinct she had was screaming contradictions. Run, stay, danger, safe. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good," Ravenscar said. "That means you're smart, but you're still here. Why?" "Because leaving would mean going back to being invisible, because staying meant having power, even if it came with a price. Because some part of her that she didn't want to name was fascinated by the man who'd just shown her the monster underneath, and then asked what she needed. Because I choose to be," Evangeline said. The words hung between them like a promise. Ravenscar's hand came up slowly, giving her time to move away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed the line of her cheekbone, careful, controlled, searingly hot. "Then choose this," he said, his voice rough. "Choose to trust me long enough to end this threat. After that, if you want to leave, I'll find a way to break the bond that doesn't destroy you. I swear it." "And if I don't want to leave?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ravenscar's eyes darkened. His thumb traced along her cheek, and Evangeline felt the touch everywhere. "Then we'll deal with that problem when we come to it," he said. She should step back, should put distance between herself and this dangerous, impossible man who could become a wolf and who looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. Instead, Evangeline leaned forward and kissed him. It was clumsy and desperate and terrifying, her hands fisting in his coat, his sharp inhale of surprise, the sudden tension in every line of his body. For one horrible second, she thought he'd push her away. Then his control shattered. His arms came around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other spanning her waist and pulling her flush against him. The kiss turned fierce, demanding, edged with something wild that made her knees weak. He tasted like danger and dark things, and when his teeth grazed her lower lip, Evangeline made a sound she didn't recognize. Ravenscar groaned against her mouth, the sound vibrating through her chest. His hand tightened in her hair, not painful, but possessive in a way that should have alarmed her and instead sent heat pooling low in her stomach. She was pressed against the table, his body a wall of heat and controlled strength. One of his hands slid to her hip, fingers spreading wide, and he pulled back abruptly, breathing hard. "Evangeline." Her name sounded wrecked coming from him. We can't. This isn't. I chose it, she said, her own breath coming in gasps. You said choose to trust you. I'm choosing. You don't understand what you're choosing. His hands were still on her, though, like he couldn't quite make himself let go. The bond. I don't care about the bond, Evangeline said recklessly. I care that you fought for me, that you're giving me a choice, that you— She stopped, not quite brave enough to finish the sentence. Ravenscar's forehead dropped to hers, his breath warm against her lips. You're going to be the death of me, he said roughly. Do you know that? Then we'll die together, Evangeline said. His laugh was raw and surprised. Extraordinary, he murmured again. Then, more carefully, he kissed her once more, softer this time, deliberate, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth. When he finally stepped back, his control was back in place, but his eyes were still dark with want. 4 days, he said. We stop the incursion, expose Harrogate and Montclair, and keep you alive. After that, we see what happens, Evangeline finished. Ravenscar nodded slowly. After that, we see what happens. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of strategy and preparation. Ravenscar called in his beta and 2 other men Evangeline hadn't met, enforcers, she gathered, from the way they moved and the deference they showed their alpha. The war room filled with tension as they mapped patrol routes and discussed Harrogate's breach. He drugged 4 guards, Calder reported, his voice tight with fury. Used something that masked his scent until he was already inside the perimeter. We've doubled the watch, but if he can do it once, he'll do it again, Ravenscar finished grimly. Which means we move up the timeline. Evangeline, how quickly can you trace the funding? She looked up from the ledgers she'd been cross-referencing. The Charity Commission records show 3 shell companies contributing to the Ravenscroft Fund. If I can access the banking records behind those companies, I can identify the true source. 2 days, maybe 3. We don't have 3 days, Ravenscar said. The 15th is day after tomorrow. Whatever they're planning happens then, and Harrogate now knows you're here and what you found. The weight of that settled over the room like fog. Then we need to force their hand, Evangeline said slowly, an idea forming. Make them move before they're ready. Ravenscar's gaze sharpened on her. How? Before she could answer, there was a commotion from the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of boots on marble, and then the library door swung open. Marquis Percival Montclair stood in the entrance, flanked by 2 men in formal dress and carrying a leather document case. Your Grace, Montclair said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm afraid we have urgent business to discuss. Ravenscar went very still. You're trespassing, Montclair. Am I? Montclair's smile was thin. I have a legal summons from the Council of Territorial Alphas. You've been challenged on your claim, Ravenscar, and according to pack law, I have every right to be here. The temperature in the room dropped. Evangeline's heart kicked against her ribs. Challenged. Ravenscar's expression was carved from ice. On what grounds? On the grounds that your so-called mate bond is fraudulent. Montclair pulled a document from the case and laid it on the table with deliberate precision. Miss Ashcombe is human, unaware of pack law, and clearly coerced into accepting a claim she didn't understand. 3 members of the council have signed a petition demanding proof of a genuine bond. If you can't provide it within 48 hours, the claim is void and Miss Ashcombe reverts to unclaimed status. Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. Unclaimed status, which meant anyone could claim her, or hurt her, or— The bond is genuine, Ravenscar said, his voice deadly quiet. Then you'll have no difficulty proving it. Montclair's gaze slid to Evangeline, and his smile widened. The trial requires demonstration of mutual recognition, physical synchronization, and emotional resonance, all observed by council witnesses, of course. If Miss Ashcombe can't pass the trials, we'll know the claim was forced. She's human, Calder said sharply. She can't synchronize with her alpha, can't sense the bond, can't demonstrate the markers of a true mate? Montclair's expression was all false sympathy. Then perhaps the claim was premature. The council takes a very dim view of alphas who abuse their power, Ravenscar. Forcing a bond on an unwilling human is grounds for censure, possibly exile. It was a trap, Evangeline realized. A beautifully constructed legal trap that would either expose the bond as fake, leaving her vulnerable, or force Ravenscar into a trial he couldn't win because she genuinely didn't have shifter abilities to demonstrate. When? Ravenscar asked, his voice like gravel. Tomorrow at moonrise. The council representatives will arrive at dusk to prepare. Montclair straightened. I trust you'll cooperate fully. After all, you have nothing to hide. He left with his entourage, and the silence in his wake was deafening. Evangeline found her voice first. What happens if we fail? You lose the bond's protection, Ravenscar said flatly. Which means Montclair can claim you himself, or sell the claim to whoever he chooses. And I face council investigation for abuse of power, which will distract from the incursion long enough for Harrogate to complete whatever he's planning. It's coordinated, Evangeline said, the pieces clicking together. Montclair challenges the claim. You're forced to focus on the trial, and Harrogate uses the chaos to breach your territory on the 15th. Ravenscar's jaw tightened. Yes. Can we pass the trial? The question hung in the air. No, Ravenscar said quietly. Not as you are. The bond isn't real enough. You're human. And the trials are designed to prove shifter connection. We'll fail, and they know it. Evangeline's mind raced. There had to be an angle, a way to turn this around. Montclair was too confident, too sure of his victory, which meant, he wants me to run, she said slowly. He's counting on me panicking and trying to break the bond myself. If I do that, you're implicated in coercion, and he wins without a trial. Yes, Ravenscar said. Then I don't run. Evangeline stood, her decision crystallizing. We give them their trial, but first I need to know something. She crossed to the ledgers and pulled out the page she'd been studying. This creditor who's foreclosing on my family's estate, Hartwell & Sons Financial Trust. I've been trying to trace the ownership, but the records are deliberately obscured. Calder moved to look over her shoulder. What about it? The timing, Evangeline said. The foreclosure proceedings began 6 months ago, exactly when Montclair's charity fund started documenting routes through Ravenscar land. That's not coincidence. Ravenscar's eyes narrowed. You think the debt was manufactured. I think my family's estate sits on the eastern boundary of your territory, Evangeline said. I think it's the perfect staging ground for an incursion because it has legitimate access roads and legal cover. And I think someone engineered our financial collapse specifically to force a foreclosure that would put the property into their control. She spread 3 documents across the table. Look at the pattern. Shell companies funding the charity. Shell companies holding the debt. Same legal firm representing both. Same bank processing the transactions. Harrogate, Calder said grimly. He's been building this for months, and using my family as leverage to ensure I'd be desperate enough to accept any protection offered. Evangeline's voice was steady, but fury burned underneath, including a bond claim that could be challenged. They've been planning this from the beginning. Montclair gets my cooperation or my silence. Harrogate gets the staging ground, and I get institutionalized or claimed by someone who'll keep me quiet. Ravenscar was staring at her with something that might have been awe. You've just mapped their entire operation. Yes, Evangeline said, which means I know how to break it. How? She met his eyes. I give them what they want. I offer to testify that you coerced me, that the bond is fake, that I want protection from you. Absolutely not, Ravenscar said immediately. Listen to me. Evangeline's voice was sharp. Montclair thinks I'm a helpless pawn. Harrogate thinks I'm a problem that can be eliminated. Neither of them believes I have agency, so we use that. Use it how? Calder demanded. I send word to Montclair privately. Tell him I've discovered the truth about what Ravenscar is, that I'm terrified, that I'll testify against him at the trial in exchange for guaranteed safety and the return of my family estate. Evangeline's pulse was racing, but her mind was clear. He'll think he's won. He'll bring me evidence, documentation, everything he has proving his claim to my estate and his alliance with Harrogate. Because he'll want to prove he can deliver on his promises. And then, Ravenscar's voice was dangerously quiet. And then I get him to incriminate himself in front of witnesses who aren't Pack. Evangeline pulled out another document. The Charitable Commission is required to investigate fraud allegations made under sworn testimony. If I can get Montclair to admit the routes are fraudulent, the shell companies are his, and the estate seizure was orchestrated, all documented by a commission clerk, it becomes a human legal matter, not just PAC politics. The room went silent. You want to trap an alpha using human law, Calder said slowly. I want to expose both of them in a way that forces consequences from both worlds, Evangeline corrected. PAC law can't touch Harrogate because he's human. Human law can't touch Montclair because he's protected by PAC status. But if I can tie them together publicly, with evidence that survives in both systems, they both face justice. Ravenscar was looking at her like he'd never seen her before. It's brilliant, he said quietly, and it's suicide. The moment Montclair realizes you're setting a trap, he'll kill you. Not if you're there. I can't be, Ravenscar said, frustration bleeding into his voice. If I'm present, he'll never speak freely. And the council representatives arrive tomorrow. I have to be here to meet them, or risk defaulting the challenge. Then send Calder. Send guards. Set your own trap around mine. Evangeline held his gaze. I'm not asking permission, Ravenscar. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can help me survive it. Or you can watch me do it alone. The words hung between them like a blade. Ravenscar closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the expression there made Evangeline's breath catch. You're not doing this alone, he said roughly. But if we're going to pull this off, we need leverage over Montclair that makes him desperate enough to meet you without his full guard. Like what? Like proof that you're more valuable to him alive and cooperative than dead and silent. Ravenscar turned to Calder. Get me everything we have on Montclair's territory holdings. I want to know what he stands to lose if this incursion fails. And send word to our contact at the magistrate's office. I want human authorities ready to move on Harrogate the moment we have evidence tying him to fraud and conspiracy. Calder nodded and left. Ravenscar looked back at Evangeline, and the weight of his attention was almost physical. You understand what you're risking. Yes. If this goes wrong, if he suspects the trap, or if Harrogate intercepts you first, you won't just be institutionalized, you'll disappear, and there won't be anything I can do about it. I know, Evangeline said quietly, but if we do nothing, they win anyway. At least this way. I'm choosing how I fight. Ravenscar crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands, the touch gentle despite the tension radiating through him. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he said, his voice raw, and the most terrifying. Evangeline's heart stuttered. Terrifying? Because you make me want to break every rule I've ever set for myself. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I don't let people in. I don't trust easily. He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I don't let myself need anyone. But you? I'm not asking you to need me, Evangeline said, though her voice shook slightly. That's the problem, Ravenscar said roughly. You're not asking. I just do. Then he kissed her. This wasn't like the first kiss, desperate and clumsy and surprised. This was deliberate, claiming, a promise and a plea wrapped together. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Evangeline melted into him with a sound that was half gasp, half surrender. She felt his control fracture, felt the leash he kept on himself slip. One of his hands dropped to her waist, pulling her against him hard enough that she could feel every line of his body. The table was at her back, and then she was sitting on it, his hips between her knees, and the world narrowed to heat and want and the taste of him on her tongue. Evangeline, he groaned against her mouth, and the sound went straight through her, her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. She'd never wanted anything the way she wanted this. Wanted him, wanted the feeling of being seen and chosen and needed. His teeth grazed her throat, and she arched into him, a whimper escaping before she could stop it. Ravenscar's hand slid up her ribs, and Evangeline's breath hitched. Too many layers, too much clothing. She wanted. Stop, Ravenscar said roughly, pulling back. We have to stop. Evangeline's eyes flew open. He was breathing hard, his pupils blown wide, his control clearly hanging by a thread. Why? The word came out plaintive. Because if we don't stop now, I won't be able to. His voice was wrecked. And you deserve better than being taken on a table in a war room the night before you risk your life for my territory. What if I don't care about better? Evangeline asked recklessly. What if I just want you? Ravenscar made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. You're killing me. Then die with me, she said, echoing her own words from before. He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then, very deliberately, he stepped back and held out his hand. Not here, and not like this. If we do this, when we do this, I want time. I want to do this properly. Evangeline's throat tightened. She took his hand. He led her out of the war room, through corridors she was beginning to recognize, up a staircase she'd never climbed, to a door that was different from the others, heavier, more private, his room's. Evangeline's pulse jumped as he opened the door and drew her inside. The space was surprisingly sparse, dark furniture, heavy curtains, a massive bed that dominated the room. But there were personal touches too. Books stacked on a side table, a half-finished letter on the desk, a window seat that looked out over the moors. Ravenscar closed the door and locked it. Then he turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her knees weak. I need you to be sure, he said. Tomorrow you're walking into a trap that could get you killed. Tonight, his voice roughened. Tonight I'm asking you to trust me with something just as dangerous. Evangeline understood what he was offering. Not just physical intimacy, but vulnerability, truth. The thing beneath the control and the power that he never showed anyone. I'm sure, she said. Ravenscar closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When she didn't, his hands came up to cup her face again, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Tell me if you want to stop, he murmured against her lips. At any point, promise me. I promise. His fingers found the fastenings of her dress, moving with surprising dexterity. The fabric loosened, slid, pulled at her feet. Evangeline stood in her chemise and stays, suddenly aware of every inch of her skin, every place he wasn't touching yet. Ravenscar's gaze traveled over her like a physical caress. Beautiful, he said roughly. She kissed him to stop the words, because if he kept talking like that, she might shatter. His hands were on her waist, her back, sliding up to unlace her stays with practiced efficiency. The restrictive garment fell away, and then there was only thin cotton between them. He backed her toward the bed, the kiss never breaking, and when the mattress hit the back of her knees, she let herself fall. Ravenscar followed her down, his weight a welcome pressure, his mouth trailing from her lips to her throat to the hollow of her collarbone. You're extraordinary, he murmured against her skin. Brave and brilliant and so much stronger than you know. Evangeline's hands found his shirt, pulling it free. She needed to feel him, needed skin against skin. He helped her, shrugging out of the fabric, and then, oh. He was all lean muscle and controlled strength. Scars scattered across his torso like a map of old battles. Evangeline traced one with her fingertips, and Ravenscar shuddered. From a challenge, he said quietly. 5 years ago, the alpha who gave me this one didn't survive the fight. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her ache for him, for the weight he carried, the violence he'd survived, the loneliness of being the strongest person in the room. You don't have to be alone anymore, she whispered. Ravenscar's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, the emotion there was raw enough to steal her breath. Neither do you, he said. And then there were no more words. Just touch and heat and the slide of skin against skin. His mouth on her breast, her hands in his hair, the slow burn building between them until Evangeline thought she might die from wanting. When the last barriers of clothing fell away and there was nothing between them but desire and trust, and the feeling of being completely seen, Evangeline pulled him close and let the rest of the world fall away. The night belonged to them alone. Morning came too quickly. Evangeline woke to pale gray light filtering through the curtains, and Ravenscar, already dressed, standing at the window with his shoulders tense. The council representatives arrived an hour ago, he said without turning. They're preparing for the trial tonight. Evangeline sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. And Montclair? I sent word last night using your plan. Told him you wanted to meet privately, that you'd testify against me in exchange for protection and the return of your estate. Ravenscar's voice was carefully neutral. He responded within the hour. He'll meet you at sunset in the old chapel on the eastern boundary, exactly where you predicted he'd choose. Because it's close to the incursion point, Evangeline said. He'll want to be in position for tomorrow. Yes, Ravenscar finally turned to look at her, and the fear in his eyes was stark. Calder will have the charitable commission clerk in position before you arrive, hidden in the confessional. He'll document everything under sworn testimony. I've also arranged for magistrates and police to be stationed near the boundary. The moment we have Montclair's confession on record and proof of Harrowgate's location, they'll move to arrest him. What about the trial? I've arranged for it to be delayed until after moonrise, claimed I needed time to prepare. His mouth twisted. It bought us 3 hours. Enough to deal with Montclair and get you back before the council declares a forfeit. Evangeline stood and crossed to him, not caring that she was only wearing his discarded shirt. It's going to work. You don't know that. No, she agreed. But I choose to believe it anyway. Ravenscar pulled her against him, his arms tight enough to hurt. If anything happens to you, then you'll tear them apart and rebuild the world on their bones, Evangeline said. I know, but nothing's going to happen because I'm smarter than they think I am, and I have you watching my back. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Extraordinary, he murmured. Terrifying and extraordinary. The hours until sunset passed in a blur of preparation. Maisie helped Evangeline dress in something practical. A dark walking dress with pockets for the documents she'd need, boots she could run in if necessary, a cloak that would blend into shadows. No jewelry except the ring, which Evangeline couldn't remove even if she wanted to. Calder briefed her on the chapel's layout, the sight lines, where he and the other enforcers would be positioned. Ravenscar would be closest, hidden in the forest but close enough to intervene within seconds. The clerk will already be in position when you arrive, Calder said. Maisie escorted him there an hour ago under the guise of charitable inspection. He's documenting everything as official commission business. You're not to engage Montclair physically, Ravenscar added, his voice tight. Your job is to get him talking, to get him to confirm the fraud, the partnership with Harrowgate, the planned incursion. Once we have that on record, we move. And if Montclair suspects the trap? Evangeline asked. Then you run, Ravenscar said. Straight back toward me. Don't look back, don't hesitate, just run. Evangeline nodded, though her stomach was churning with nerves. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was time. The old chapel sat on the edge of Ravenscar land like a forgotten grave marker, all crumbling stone and broken stained glass. Evangeline approached it as the last light drained from the sky, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Montclair was already waiting inside, flanked by 2 guards who looked more like street thugs than pack enforcers. He smiled when she entered, and the expression was all teeth. Miss Ashcombe, how brave of you to come. I want my family protected, Evangeline said, keeping her voice shaky and desperate. And I want the truth about what Ravenscar is, what I've gotten myself into. All in good time, Montclair gestured to a pew. Sit, we have much to discuss. Evangeline sat, clasping her hands in her lap to hide their trembling, though not all of it was feigned. This close, Montclair radiated danger in a way that made her skin crawl. The trial is in 3 hours, Montclair said. If you testify that Ravenscar forced the bond, that you never consented, that you fear for your safety, the council will void the claim and censure him, possibly exile him. And then? Evangeline asked. And then you're free. Montclair's smile widened. Your family's estate will be returned, the debts forgiven, you'll be under my protection, which means no harm will come to you. Why would you do that for me? Because you're valuable, Miss Ashcombe. Your mind, your eye for patterns, your ability to navigate both human and pack society without raising suspicion. He leaned forward slightly. I could use someone like you. And unlike Ravenscar, I wouldn't lock you away in a country estate and pretend it's for your own good. Evangeline forced herself to look uncertain, tempted. The estate seizure, was that you? Does it matter? Montclair asked. It served its purpose. You needed protection, Ravenscar provided it. And now, we're here. It matters to me, Evangeline said. I need to know if I'm trading one trap for another. Montclair studied her for a long moment. Then he shrugged. Yes. Harrogate and I arranged the foreclosure. Your estate sits on a critical access point to Ravenscar territory. We needed either your cooperation or your absence. When you proved more perceptive than expected, we adjusted the plan. By having me publicly accused of instability. By giving Ravenscar an opportunity to claim you, knowing he'd do exactly that because he's predictable when it comes to protecting his territory. Montclair's expression was smug. And knowing that claim could be challenged because you're human and the bond is fake. Is it? Evangeline asked quietly. Fake? Of course it is. You're human. You can't bond with a shifter in any real sense. The ring is just pack theater designed to warn off rivals. Montclair's voice was dismissive. The trial will prove it. You'll be free. And we can move forward with our partnership. What partnership? Evangeline pressed. What are you and Harrogate actually planning? This was it. The moment where he either revealed everything or realized he'd said too much. Montclair's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you want to know? Because I need to know what I'm agreeing to, Evangeline said. If I'm going to testify against Ravenscar, if I'm going to put myself under your protection, I need to understand what comes next. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd see through the act, and everything would fall apart. Then Montclair smiled. Very well, you've earned the truth. He pulled out a map and spread it across the pew between them. Tomorrow at dawn, Harrogate's hunters cross into Ravenscar territory, using routes we've documented as charitable deliveries. They'll have legal cover, institutional backing, and enough force to flush out every shifter in the eastern forest. Evangeline's blood ran cold. You're going to kill them. We're going to exterminate a threat, Montclair corrected. And in the chaos, certain territorial boundaries will shift. Ravenscar's lands will be divided among the surviving council members, myself included. Your family estate becomes a legitimate outpost. Everyone wins. Except the people who die, Evangeline said. Except the monsters who die, Montclair said. Surely you understand that, Miss Ashcombe. You've seen what Ravenscar is, what he can become. Do you really want creatures like that living among humans? It was the final piece, the confession that tied him to genocide, to fraud, to everything that would damn him in both human and pack law. Evangeline stood slowly, her hand going to the documents in her pocket. I understand perfectly, she said. I understand that you're a murderer and a traitor, and I've just gotten you to confess to all of it in front of a witness. Montclair's expression went from smug to lethal in a heartbeat. What? The clerk stepped out from behind the confessional screen, his face pale but his hands steady on his notebook. Sworn testimony recorded, he said. Charitable Commission Inquiry number 472. Montclair lunged for Evangeline. She ran. Straight toward the door, toward the forest, toward Ravenscar. Behind her, she heard Montclair snarl, an inhuman sound that raised every hair on her body. She burst through the chapel doors into twilight and nearly collided with Calder. Get down, he shouted. Evangeline dropped as Montclair exploded out of the chapel behind her, already half-shifted, bones cracking, fur rippling across his skin. And then Ravenscar was there, not human, not anymore. The massive black wolf stepped between Evangeline and Montclair with a snarl that made the air vibrate. Behind him, a dozen more wolves emerged from the forest. Enforcers, pack, loyal to their alpha. Montclair shifted fully, a gray wolf nearly as large as Ravenscar, his lips pulled back in a vicious snarl. Stand down, Ravenscar's voice came from the wolf's throat. Impossible and terrifying. The challenge is witnessed. The confession is recorded. You've lost, Montclair. I've lost nothing, Montclair snarled back. You think human law matters. You think pack law will protect you when Harrogate's hunters burn this entire territory to the ground. Harrogate won't be burning anything, a new voice said. Evangeline turned. Sir Gideon Harrogate stood at the edge of the clearing, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were men in official uniforms, magistrates, police, representatives from the Charitable Commission. And they were arresting him. Fraud, Conspiracy and attempted murder, one of the magistrates said flatly. Sir Gideon Harrogate, you're under arrest by order of Her Majesty's court. Harrogate's face went white with fury. You can't, this is documented in triplicate, the magistrate said. With sworn testimony from multiple witnesses, you're finished. Evangeline stared in shock. Calder caught her eye and gave a small nod. Ravenscar had arranged all of this. The magistrates, the coordination, the timing. He'd outmaneuvered both of them. Montclair seemed to realize it too. He lunged, not at Ravenscar, but at Evangeline. He never made it. Ravenscar moved like lightning, intercepting the attack mid-leap. The two wolves collided with bone-jarring force, and then they were fighting in earnest, teeth and claws, and brutal, efficient violence. Calder pulled Evangeline back, shielding her with his body. The fight was over in seconds. Ravenscar had Montclair pinned, jaws at his throat, one massive paw on his chest. Not killing, just holding, demonstrating dominance without crossing the line into execution. Yield, Ravenscar growled. Montclair went still beneath him. This isn't over. It is, Ravenscar said. Then he released Montclair and shifted back to human form in a ripple of magic and displaced air, the shifter magic reforming his clothing along with his body. He stood, fully dressed and utterly composed despite the violence, and looked down at Montclair with cold finality. You violated pack law, human law, and territorial agreements. The council will strip your rank and exile you. Harrogate will face human justice for his crimes. And Miss Ashcombe, his gaze shifted to her, is under my protection, permanently. Montclair shifted back too, his face twisted with rage. The incursion still happens. The hunters are already in position. You can arrest me, arrest Harrogate, but you can't stop what's coming at dawn. Actually, Evangeline said quietly, stepping forward. I can. She pulled the final document from her pocket, the one she'd prepared that morning while Maisie had helped with the clerk. This is a legal injunction filed with the Charitable Commission, the Magistrate's Office, and the Territorial Land Office. It freezes all routes documented under the Ravenscroft Children's Fund, pending investigation. Any personnel attempting to cross into private land via those routes will be arrested for trespassing and prosecuted under Crown law. She met Montclair's eyes. Your hunters have no legal cover, no institutional protection, and no element of surprise. They're criminals now, and the Crown takes a very dim view of armed trespassers. The full weight of his defeat settled over Montclair's face. He lunged one more time, pure desperation, pure rage. Ravenscar caught him by the throat and forced him to the ground. Enough. This time, Montclair stayed down. The council trial began 3 hours after Montclair's arrest. Evangeline stood in the center of Ravenscar's great hall, surrounded by 3 stern-faced alphas who'd traveled from distant territories to witness the bond trial. The room felt like a courtroom and an execution chamber all at once. Miss Ashcombe, the eldest alpha, said, his voice formal and cold, "You understand why we're here." "You believe the bond is false," Evangeline said steadily. "That I was coerced." "Were you?" The question hung in the air. Evangeline looked at Ravenscar, who stood off to the side with Calder, his expression carefully neutral. He'd told her what to expect. Questions designed to expose hesitation. Tests meant to prove she couldn't sense pack bonds. Demonstrations that would fail because she was human. But something had changed. She could feel Ravenscar's presence like a warmth against her skin, even though he was 20 feet away. When he'd been fighting Montclair, she'd felt every impact like it was happening to her own body. And now, standing here under the council's scrutiny, she could sense his tension, his fear for her, his absolute certainty that she was going to choose truth over safety. The bond had become real, not because of magic or pack law or anything they'd planned, but because they'd chosen each other. Again and again, in every dangerous moment, every impossible decision. The ring had been a symbol, but what they'd built together was something deeper. "No," Evangeline said clearly. "I wasn't coerced. I chose the bond." "You're human," another alpha said. "You can't sense pack bonds. You can't synchronize with an alpha. The markers aren't there." Then test me, Evangeline said. Ravenscar's eyes widened fractionally. They hadn't planned this. She was improvising, trusting something she couldn't name. The eldest alpha gestured. Very well, turn your back to Duke Ravenscar. Evangeline turned. Now tell us when he moves. Silence stretched. Evangeline closed her eyes and focused on the warmth she could feel, the pull she'd been ignoring because it was impossible. There, a shift in the air. A change in the pressure against her awareness. Now, she said. Correct, the alpha said, surprise bleeding into his voice. Again. 3 more times they tested her. 3 more times she knew exactly when Ravenscar moved, when he was close, when he was far. The bond that shouldn't exist hummed between them like a living thing. How, the third alpha demanded. I don't know, Evangeline admitted, but I can feel him. I know when he's in pain, I know when he's afraid, and I know, she turned to face Ravenscar directly. I know that this bond is real, whether it should be possible or not. The alphas conferred in low voices. Finally, the eldest spoke. The bond is genuine, unprecedented, but genuine. His gaze moved to Ravenscar. The prevailing theory is that true bonds form not from pack magic alone, but from choice made under extreme duress. You both chose each other repeatedly in life-threatening circumstances. That choice, combined with the ring's seal and her prolonged exposure to your pack, appears to have forged something new. He paused. Your claim stands, Duke Ravenscar. Though I suggest you document this carefully, the council will want to understand how this happened. They left, and the great hall emptied of witnesses. Evangeline's knees went weak. Ravenscar crossed to her in 3 strides and caught her before she could fall. How did you do that? He asked, wonder and relief mixing in his voice. I don't know, Evangeline said honestly, but it's real, Alistair. Whatever this is between us, it's real. He pulled her close, and for the first time since she'd met him, she felt him truly relax. The fear that had been coiled in him since the moment Montclair challenged the bond finally released. I know, he said quietly. I've known since the moment you chose to stay. They stood together in the empty hall, and the weight of everything they'd survived crashed over them both. The ballroom claim, the garden attack, the chapel trap, the battle. Every moment where they could have lost each other, but hadn't. Ravenscar's hands came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the emotion radiating through him. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough. Before anything else happens, before the next crisis or the next threat, I need you to know. Evangeline's breath caught. What? I love you, he said. The words came out raw and honest, stripped of the control he usually wielded like armor. I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds, and this bond is unprecedented, and there are 100 political ramifications we'll have to navigate. But none of that changes the fact that I love you, Evangeline. You're the bravest, most brilliant person I've ever met. You see patterns no one else sees. You make impossible choices look easy, and you've made me believe in partnership instead of just control. I love you. And I needed you to know that before we face whatever comes next. Evangeline finished softly. Her eyes were burning with unshed tears. I love you too, Alistair. I love that you gave me choices when you could have just commanded. I love that you fight with honor even when it would be easier not to. I love that you trusted me to set the trap with Montclair, even though it terrified you. I love you because you're impossible and terrifying, and you've never once made me feel small. Ravenscar's expression cracked open into something vulnerable and real. Say it again. I love you, Evangeline said, smiling through tears. My alpha, my partner, my... He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of all the fear they'd both been holding back. When he finally pulled away, both of them were breathing hard. Whatever happens next, Ravenscar said, his forehead resting against hers, we face it together. Together, Evangeline agreed. The moment stretched between them, perfect and fragile. Then Calder burst through the doors, his face grim. They're coming, he said. The hunters. They're not waiting for dawn. They're breaching now. Ravenscar's whole body went tense. How? Harrowgate's arrested. The injunction. The cells had pre-programmed contingency orders, Calder said grimly. If Harrogate was arrested or failed to send an all-clear signal by midnight, the secondary commanders were ordered to execute the incursion immediately. They're already at the eastern boundary. Evangeline's stomach dropped. Of course Harrogate would have planned for failure. Of course he'd have built in redundancies. How many? Ravenscar demanded. 20? Maybe 30. Armed with silver and fire. Calder's expression was dark. They're burning the forest, trying to flush out anyone in shifted form. Ravenscar's hands clenched into fists. Get the pack to the safe houses. Anyone who can't fight needs to be behind stone walls. Now. And you? Calder asked. I'm ending this. Ravenscar looked at Evangeline, and the emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. You need to get to safety. Maisie will take you to the inner keep. It's warded and— No, Evangeline said. Evangeline. No, she repeated, stronger. I'm not hiding while you fight a battle I helped start. Those hunters are here because of the routes I exposed, the evidence I gathered, the trap I set. I don't get to walk away from the consequences. You'll die, Ravenscar said flatly. You're human. You can't fight trained hunters. Then I'll do what I do best, Evangeline said. I'll think. I'll plan. I'll find the angle they're not expecting. She met his eyes. But I'm not leaving you. Not after what we just said to each other. Not ever. Ravenscar closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, something had shifted. If you stay, you follow my orders. If I tell you to run— I'll run, Evangeline said. I promise. He nodded once, then turned to Calder. Double guard on the safe houses. Pull the perimeter in tight. We make our stand at the estate boundary. Force them into a bottleneck where numbers don't matter as much. The next hour was a blur of preparation and controlled chaos. Evangeline watched Ravenscar transform from a duke into a war commander, directing his pack with absolute authority. Guards took positions. Traps were set, and Evangeline studied the maps, looking for the pattern, the weakness, the thing everyone else was missing. She found it in the torch positions. They're not just burning randomly, she said, calling Ravenscar over to the map. Look, the fires form a line. They're herding your pack toward the center of the boundary. Ravenscar's eyes narrowed. A killing field. They've got shooters positioned here and here, Evangeline traced the likely positions. Once your pack is boxed in, they'll have clear lines of fire. Then we don't give them the box. Ravenscar's expression turned calculating. We split into 3 groups. Calder takes the north flank, I take the south, and we come at them from the sides while they're focused on the center. They'll expect that, Evangeline said. They'll have planned for a flanking maneuver. Then what do you suggest? Evangeline looked at the map, her mind racing. Give them what they want. Let them think they've succeeded in boxing you in. But the pack in the center, it's not your fighters. It's your fastest runners. The moment the hunters commit to the ambush, the runners scatter in different directions, and your actual fighters collapse on the shooters from behind. Ravenscar stared at her. It's brilliant, and it's insane. It's the only way to win without losing people, Evangeline said. They're expecting you to fight like a pack. Fight like a chess player instead. Something fierce and proud lit in Ravenscar's eyes. Change of plans, he said, louder, to his enforcers. The trap was set. Evangeline crouched behind a stone wall with Maisie and 2 guards. Watching the forest burn, she could see the hunters moving through the smoke, could hear their shouts as they closed in on what they thought was a cornered pack. Ravenscar and his fighters were hidden in the darkness behind the hunter positions, waiting for the signal. The decoy group, young fast-pack members who'd volunteered for the most dangerous role, appeared in the clearing right on schedule. The hunters saw them and raised their weapons. Now, Evangeline whispered, though no one could hear her. The decoys scattered in 6 different directions, moving faster than humans could track. The hunters fired anyway, but their shots went wide. And then Ravenscar's fighters struck, not from the front, from behind. Wolves poured out of the darkness, a dozen of them, massive and terrifying, moving with coordinated precision. They hit the hunter line like an avalanche, scattering men and weapons and breaking the formation into chaos. Ravenscar was the largest wolf among them, his black fur barely visible in the smoke, except for his eyes, burning gold and absolutely focused. This was shift number 3, the high-stakes shift, the climactic battle that would end the threat once and for all. Evangeline watched Ravenscar tear through the hunter ranks with brutal efficiency, breaking bones, scattering weapons, subduing without killing. Even now, even in wolf form, in the middle of a battle for his territory's survival, he held to that line. No executions, no kills, just overwhelming force that left enemies alive but defeated. But even as the main battle turned in their favor, Evangeline saw the problem. One hunter had broken away from the main group. He was moving toward the safe houses where the vulnerable pack members were sheltering. Every guard on this flank was locked in combat or tending wounded. Ravenscar was a distant, dark shape across the burning clearing, and he was carrying something that looked like a bomb. No, Evangeline breathed. Maisie saw it too. We have to warn them. But there wasn't time. The safe house was too far. The guards were engaged. Ravenscar was on the opposite side of the battlefield. Evangeline made a decision. She ran, straight toward the hunter, toward the danger, with nothing but her wits, and the desperate need to protect people she'd come to care about. Behind her, she heard Maisie shout, heard guards try to intercept, but she was already committed. Hey, Evangeline shouted at the hunter. You're going the wrong way, the man spun, startled. Up close, he was young, maybe her age, with wild eyes and the kind of conviction that made people dangerous. The shifters are behind you, Evangeline said, forcing her voice to shake. I escaped. I was their prisoner. Please, you have to help me. The hunter hesitated, his grip loosening on the incendiary device. You're human? Yes, Evangeline said, moving closer. They kept me in the estate. The Duke, he's a monster. I saw what he is. Please, I just want to get away from here. She was close enough now to see the device clearly. It was crude, but effective. Oil-soaked rags wrapped around something that looked like black powder. This building, the hunter said, gesturing to the safe house. There are more of them inside? I don't know, Evangeline lied. I just want to leave. Can you help me? The hunter looked torn. Then suspicion crept into his expression. How did you get past the guards? I ran when the fighting started, Evangeline said. Please, A snarl cut through the night. Ravenscar stood 20 feet away, human again but covered in blood and ash, his eyes blazing with fury and fear. Get away from her. The hunter grabbed Evangeline, pressing the device against her ribs. Call off your animals, or she dies. Ravenscar went very still. Let her go. I'll kill her, the hunter said. I'll burn her along with every monster in this territory. You won't, Ravenscar said quietly, because if you hurt her, there won't be a place on earth you can hide from me. The hunter's hand shook. You're the abomination. You're the thing that needs to die. And Evangeline saw the moment he decided to do it. Saw his finger move toward the flint that would ignite the oil. She drove her elbow into his ribs and dropped. The device went flying. Ravenscar moved like lightning, catching it before it hit the ground, smothering the rag before it could spark. The hunter lunged for Evangeline with a knife she hadn't seen. Ravenscar caught him mid-leap and slammed him to the ground, hard enough to stun, but not hard enough to kill. Not crossing that line, even now. Then he was pulling Evangeline into his arms, his whole body shaking. What were you thinking? I was thinking I wasn't going to let him blow up the safe house, Evangeline said, her own voice unsteady. I was thinking you needed time to get here. I was thinking. You were thinking you could trade your life for theirs, Ravenscar said roughly. You were thinking I could survive losing you. I was thinking we're partners, Evangeline said. Which means your people are my people. Your fight is my fight. And I don't let my people die if I can prevent it. Ravenscar stared at her, and something in his expression shifted from fear to something else entirely. Pride. Understanding. The realization that she wasn't just his mate in title. She was his true partner in every sense that mattered. He kissed her then, desperate and claiming and full of relief that they were both still alive. Around them the battle was ending. The hunters were retreating or surrendering. The fires were being controlled. The immediate threat was over. Don't ever do that again, Ravenscar said against her lips. I can't promise that, Evangeline replied honestly. His laugh was raw. I know. That's what terrifies me. Dawn broke over Ravenscar Hall with golden light that turned the smoke-stained grounds into something almost beautiful. A letter from her brother, safe and chattering excitedly about his new tutors, lay open on the desk beside her. Evangeline stood at the window of Ravenscar's study, watching the sun rise over lands that were safe again. Behind her, she could hear Calder giving his report. Minimal casualties, all hunters either arrested or fled. The incursion definitively ended. The council is satisfied, Calder was saying. Montclair has been exiled. Harrogate faces trial in London. The Charitable Commission is conducting a full audit of every fund connected to them. And your claim? He glanced at Evangeline. Well, the council is calling it a miracle. The first human shifter true bond in recorded history. What happens now? Evangeline asked, turning from the window. Ravenscar crossed to stand beside her. Now we rebuild, repair the damage, strengthen the boundaries, make sure this never happens again. I meant with us, Evangeline said quietly. Ravenscar took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring that no longer felt like a trap. That depends on what you want. What are my options? You could leave, Ravenscar said. Now that the threat is over, I could find a way to dissolve the bond without hurting you. You'd have your freedom, your family estate back, enough money to live independently. You'd be safe. And if I don't want to leave? Then you stay, Ravenscar said simply. As my mate, my Luna, my partner in running this territory and protecting these people. It won't be easy. You'll be navigating pack politics and human society, learning laws and customs you never asked to know. You'll be bound to someone who isn't entirely human. But you'll have power, purpose, and his voice softened. You'll have me, for as long as you want me. Evangeline looked out at the estate grounds, at the people beginning to emerge from the safe houses, at the forest beyond where shifters and humans would have to learn to coexist. She thought about the life she'd had before, invisible, powerless, fighting to survive on the margins of someone else's world. And she thought about the life she could have now, dangerous, complicated, full of purpose and choice and the feeling of being completely, utterly seen. I'm not doing this for shelter, Evangeline said, or safety, or because I don't have other options. I know, Ravenscar said. I'm doing this because I choose you, she continued. Because I choose this life. Because I want to be your partner, not your possession. Your equal, not your responsibility. You already are, Ravenscar said quietly. You proved that last night when you risked everything to save people you barely knew. When you outthought trained hunters and council alphas in me. He smiled slightly. You've been my equal from the moment you negotiated terms in that carriage. I've just been catching up. Evangeline turned to face him fully. Then yes, I stay. I claim this life. I claim you. And we build something better together. Ravenscar pulled her close, and in the morning light, with the sound of rebuilding beginning outside and the bond humming between them like a promise, Evangeline felt something she'd never felt before. She felt home. Extraordinary, Ravenscar murmured against her hair. My extraordinary, terrifying Luna. Your partner, Evangeline corrected. My partner, Ravenscar agreed. Always. 3 months later, Evangeline stood in the same great hall where the council had tested their bond. But the room felt completely different now. The Dowager Countess had come to call, a peace offering after months of awkward silence. She sat across from Evangeline with tea and careful courtesy, clearly trying to navigate the new reality of her former paid companion now being one of the most powerful women in the territory. You've done well for yourself, Miss Ashcombe, the Countess said. Though it was Lady Ravenscar now, technically. I did what I had to do, Evangeline replied. And then I chose what I wanted. The Countess's smile was thin but genuine. A lesson I should have learned myself, perhaps. In any case, I came to apologize. And to offer my services, should you need assistance navigating society as a duchess. It was the closest to contrition the woman would ever come. Thank you, Evangeline said. I'll consider it. After the Countess left, Ravenscar appeared in the doorway. How did it go? She's afraid of me now, Evangeline said. not without satisfaction. It's an improvement. Ravenscar's laugh was warm. You've become quite terrifying, you know. The Council Alphas are already discussing new territorial agreements because they're worried about what you might think of next. Good, Evangeline said. They should be worried. We're going to change everything. And they were. The estate was becoming a model for human-shifter cooperation. Evangeline had established new protocols, new systems of justice that honored both pack law and crown law. She'd negotiated trade agreements, settled border disputes, and proven that a human could not only survive in the shifter world, but thrive. Ravenscar crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. Outside, Evangeline could hear Maisie organizing the household staff, could smell bread baking in the kitchens, could feel the pulse of life returning to lands that had been too long shadowed by threat and fear. Regrets? Ravenscar asked quietly. Evangeline thought about it honestly. Not one. Even though I'm a monster? Especially because you're a monster, she said, smiling. My monster, my alpha, my impossible, wonderful partner. Ravenscar kissed her, slow and claiming and full of promise. And in that moment, with fog rolling in from the moors and safety secured, and the future stretching bright before them, Evangeline knew she'd made the right choice. She'd chosen power over safety, partnership over shelter, love over certainty, and she'd never been happier.